Alright, in this one we're going to take a look at Blender's interface because it can be a little bit overwhelming when you first open up Blender and you see all these different buttons. But if we think about it as different compartmentalized windows, it's a lot easier to visualize. So here at the very top we have the header of the Blender window. Here we have some predefined layouts for different things that we can do. And we have the traditional file and edit buttons right here, where you could save your blend file and much more. So once again, we have the header bar here. And then this big window right here is the 3D viewport layout. Now this 3D viewport screen is the biggest screen on our default layout. And this is because this is where most of what you do in Blender is going to happen. This is where you're going to see your models, your animations, and the visual representation of your scene. As you can see in the 3D viewport, we can see that it is set to 3D viewport by going up here. You can see it's set to 3D viewport. Now in the 3D viewport, we have a cube, a camera, which I could select by clicking, and a light. We also have a grid floor right here with an x-axis, which is the red one, and a y-axis, which is the green one right here. We also have a z-axis, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So this is the 3D viewport window. Next down here, if I go over here and drag this up a little bit, you can see we have the timeline window. And once again, I could click here and you can see that it is set to timeline. Now the timeline is a visual representation of the different frames or seconds in your animation. You can see I could left click and drag, and each of these different numbers are different frames. Now in Blender, by default, it is 24 frames per second. So 24 of these frames right here will be 1 second of animation. You can see if I hit the spacebar to play it, it will play our animation. Now obviously right now nothing is animated, so nothing is playing. You could also see here we have the start frame being 1, the end frame being 250, and this is the current frame that it's on right now. I could pause it by hitting the spacebar key and hit shift left arrow to bring it back to frame 1. So once again, this is the timeline, and this will be used for animating your different objects through the time or the frames of Blender. Now right here we have the properties panel. As you can see, it is set to properties, and the properties panel will give you different properties depending on which object you have selected. So here, if you select the cube, you can see you have some different properties. You select the camera, you have different properties, and the light as well. Now in here you have different tabs. As you can see, we have modifiers, we have object data right here, we could change the materials of our cube, etc. Over here we have the render properties, and down here we have the output properties, so depending on the size of the output image or animation, etc, etc. So again, this window is used quite often, as this will give you a bunch of different properties depending on which object you have selected and depending on what you want to do. So that's the properties panel. Next we have the outliner. Once again, here you can see that it is set to outliner, and this basically lists out or outlines everything in your 3D viewport. So you can see right here we have the camera, we have the cube, and we have the light. And you can see that all of these are set into a collection or a group. So right here, all these objects are in this collection called collection. Now this is really cool, the outliner, because if you have a lot of different objects in your scene, you could just go here, and for example, we could search for cube and just find that object easily by searching for it. So that is Blender's interface. Again, we have the header bar here, 3D viewport right here, the timeline here, we have the properties panel, and the outliner. Now let's say we want to change this up a little bit. Well, if we go to any corner of any of these windows, you can see we get a crosshair. Now what we can do is we can merge windows together or separate windows out to get more windows. Let's say we don't want the timeline here. Well, I could go to the bottom left corner of our 3D viewport until I get the crosshair, left click and drag down, and you will see that now I have this option selecting with an arrow right here. So I could merge the 3D viewport down into the timeline, or I could merge the timeline up into the 3D viewport. So let's merge the 3D viewport down into the timeline, and you can see that now it is just the 3D viewport. If I want to go ahead and have only the properties right here and not the outliner, I could do the same here. Just go to one of the corners. And if I left click and drag it up, I now have, if I don't let it go, I have the option of merging either the properties panel up or the outliner down. So let's say we just want the properties panel. I could bring it up and let go and it will merge it. Very cool. Now let's say we want to have these back. Well, we could do the same thing. As we remove the windows, we could add windows. So if I go to the bottom left corner here of our 3D viewport, left click and drag up, you can see it adds another window. And right here it is set to 3D viewport, so we have two 3D viewports. But let's change this back to the timeline right here. So now we have the timeline once again. And same with over here. Let's go to the top corner here, left click and drag down. And once again, this is properties panel as well. Let's change this to the outliner so that we have our outliner back. And now we are back to the default layout right here. Now at the top, you can see we have different pre-made layouts. You can see we have a layout for modeling, sculpting, UV editing, texture painting, etc. We have one for geometry nodes, which we're going to be using. And you can see we could change quickly the layout of how it looks depending on what we're doing. Now, obviously, these are predefined layouts. You could, for example, do geometry nodes in this default layout. It all depends. These are predefined layouts so that you don't have to create the layout yourself. But for example, if we look at geometry nodes right here, you can see that right here we have a spreadsheet. As you can see, it's set to spreadsheet. And this one right here is set to geometry node editor. So in the default layout, we could, if we wanted to, change this one to the geometry node editor right here. And then we could go to the bottom left corner here, drag this out, and change this to the spreadsheet right here. And as you can see, we have the same layout as the geometry nodes. So you could create your own layout or use a predefined one if you want. Let me go ahead and collapse this back here and change this back to the timeline. All right, last thing, let's say you want to maximize a window. Well, for example, here, if we hover our mouse over the 3D viewport, we could hit Control Spacebar, and that will maximize whatever window your mouse is hovering over. So we can maximize the properties, the outliner, or the timeline. Usually this is used to maximize the 3D viewport or a node window, as that will give you more space and an easier visualization of it, as it will take up your whole screen. So it does make it easier. You usually won't maximize the properties panel or the timeline or the outliner, but this is usually used once again to maximize the 3D viewport or, for example, in geometry nodes, the node setup right here. So with that, that is Blender's interface. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao for now. Au revoir.